The phone rang just as I was about to go to bed. It was 12:30 in the evening, and I had just turned off the TV after watching the evening news. To be honest, it had been a long time since I had expected a call at this hour. Over the past 25 years, my life had become so predictable that even this sudden sound seemed like a mistake. "Hello?" I said uncertainly, not recognizing the number. "Myrtle," came the hoarse, slightly squeaky voice I hadn't heard in years, but recognized immediately. "It's me, Berta, your sister." I took a deep breath, feeling a chill run down my spine. Berta had never called. In all these years, we've exchanged only Christmas cards and the occasional email. "What's wrong?" I asked, knowing I was going to hear something terrible. "Truly has been arrested," she said without preamble. "She's in the county jail. The charges are serious, Myrtle. Assault on Maynard Sheen. You know, the owner of Garfield Chemical." I sat on the edge of the bed. My daughter, whom I hadn't seen in almost 20 years, had been arrested for assaulting Sheen. Maynard Sheen was not the same owner as he was in my past life, of course. "What exactly did she do?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "No one knows for sure. They say she was stalking him, then went into the office and attacked him with her fists. The security guards twisted her. But that's an unofficial rumor." Berta paused. "Myrtle, Garrett is furious. He didn't even come to her first hearing. He says he's done with her." Garrett. A name I hadn't said out loud in years. "Why did you decide to call me?" I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Because Truly needs someone to stand by her," Berta said simply. "And Garrett, you know, yes, I knew. I knew exactly what Garrett could be like, and that's why I disappeared from Garfield 25 years ago, changed my name, started a new life, leaving behind a 4-year-old daughter. "I'll be there," I heard my own voice say before I could think carefully. "Good," Berta said without much emotion. "Let me know when you get there." After the call, I sat motionless on the bed for a long time. My thoughts were confused. I knew that I would have to face the past someday, but I sincerely hoped that it would never happen. Now, there was no choice. My daughter, no matter how unfamiliar she was to me now, needed help. It took me less than an hour to get ready. I took a vacation from the water treatment plant, where I had worked as an operator for the past 15 years. I packed the essentials in a small suitcase and got into my old Ford, which was to make the 7-hour journey to a city I had sworn I would never see again. The traffic was light at night, and I decided to drive nonstop. On the way, I thought about what I would tell my daughter, how to explain my absence for all these years, how to explain why I didn't take her with me, and whether she even wanted to see me. When the sky began to lighten in the east, I was already crossing the county border. The old sign for Welcome to Garfield, the heart of the chemical industry, was faded and partially rusted. Like everything else in this town, I thought, Garfield was a classic example of Rust Belt industrial decline. The once prosperous town had become a shadow of itself after most businesses closed or downsized in the 90s and 20s. I entered the city around 8 in the morning. The streets looked much the same as in my memories, only more shabby, with more empty storefronts and closed establishments. On Maple Street, which used to be a busy shopping artery, at least half of the shops now had boards in their windows. A new miniature supermarket opened on the corner, displacing the old Peterson's bakery. Berta's house, a small one-story house on Oak Avenue, looked much the same as it had 25 years earlier. Only the wood paneling had darkened with time, and a small shed had appeared in the yard. I parked the car and just sat there for a while, staring at the familiar outlines. I never thought I would see this place again. Taking my suitcase, I walked up the small steps to the porch and knocked on the door. Berta opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting outside. My older sister looked exactly as I remembered her, only with deeper wrinkles around her eyes and completely gray hair pulled into a tight knot at the back of her head. "Myrtle," she said with a nod and stepped back, letting me in. No hugs or other displays of affection, but I didn't expect them from Berta. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and a little bit of cigarettes. Berta led me to the kitchen, where 2 cups and a plate of scrambled eggs were already on the table. "Have some breakfast," she said, pouring me coffee. "You look tired." I sat down at the table and looked at my sister. "Tell me more about what happened." Berta sat down across from me, folding her hands in front of her. It was a familiar gesture. She always did that when she was about to tell me something important. Truly started working as a courier after she left college. For the last 6 months, she's been making a lot of deliveries to Garfield Chemical. Berta spoke slowly, choosing her words. Then, about 2 weeks ago, she started asking strange questions about the plant, about the waste discharge, about where the wastewater goes. You know, the kind of things you don't want to ask in this town. I knew. Oh, how well I knew. 3 days ago, she came to Garfield Chemicals headquarters, ostensibly to make a delivery, but instead asked to see Maynard Sheen. When she was refused, she started to make a scene. A security guard called the police, but before they arrived, Sheen came down to the lobby himself, truly attacked him, and hit him several times. They say she was shouting something about poisoning, about killing people. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My daughter stumbled upon the same thing I did years ago. She's charged with assault and threats, but Shin hints that he may add industrial espionage charges. Berta shakes her head. Garrett refuses to hire a lawyer. He says she's not his daughter anymore. "Where is he now?" I asked, feeling my jaw clench. "As usual," Berta snapped, "in his office at the security office. He's still in charge." Of course, I thought. Garrett Wojcik, Garfield Chemicals' permanent head of security. The man who had been covering up the company's dirty deeds for almost 30 years. "I want to see Truly," I said, pushing my almost untouched eggs away. "Visiting hours start at 11, Berta replied. "I made an appointment for 11:30. You can rest until then." I shook my head. "I won't be able to sleep. I'd rather walk around the city, see what's changed." "As you wish," Berta shrugged. "But don't go near the factory." Who would recognize me now? I smiled bitterly. I don't recognize myself in the mirror. Berta gave me an appraising look. At 58, I looked completely different than I did when I left Garfield at 33. My once brown hair was now gray and cut short, and instead of contact lenses, I wore plain-framed glasses. I lost weight, my features became sharper, and deep wrinkles appeared. Even my name was different now, Martha Wojtowicz instead of Myrta Wojcik. "Still, be careful," Berta insisted. "This town has a long memory." I nodded and got up from the table. Better safe than sorry. The walk through Garfield was depressing. The town was dying a slow death. Half of the houses on Main Street were empty, with their windows boarded up. The old Rock's movie theater had turned into a cheap second-hand store. The Johnson's supermarket had disappeared, and in its place was now a dollar store. Near the park, I noticed several young men who seemed to be under the influence of drugs. A typical picture for cities experiencing economic decline. The only building that looked prosperous was the headquarters of Garfield Chemical, a 3-story structure with mirrored windows and well-kept grounds. I walked around it on the 10th Road, although my heart pounded whenever I walked even a few blocks away. At 11:30, I returned to Berta, and together we drove to the county jail. The gloomy concrete building on the outskirts of the city brought back disturbing memories. It was here that I had been interrogated when I first tried to talk about waste dumping. After the standard registration procedure, we were taken to a visiting room. I sat down at a table and waited. Berta stood against the wall with her arms crossed over her chest. When the door opened and Truly entered the room, my breath caught in my throat. My daughter, whom I had only seen in a few photos Berta had sent me, was now standing in front of me. Tall, thin, with my high cheekbones and Garrett's dark brown eyes. Her brown hair was tied up loosely in a ponytail. She wore a standard orange prison uniform that seemed too big. Bertha Truly looked only at my sister, ignoring me. "What are you doing here?" Then her gaze slowly moved to me, and surprise flashed in her eyes, followed by anger. "Truly," I started, but the words stuck in my throat. My daughter stood there looking at me as if she had seen a ghost. Then she slowly sat down in the chair opposite me. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice cold and sharp. I, I stuttered again. "I heard you were in trouble." "Trouble?" Truly laughed bitterly. 25 years without a word, and you show up because I'm in trouble. Truly, I understand that you're angry. I started, but she interrupted me. "You don't understand anything," she said through clenched teeth. "You just disappeared. You know what your father said, that you ran off with your lover, that you didn't care about your child." I turned pale. Garrett would make up a story like that, of course. "It's not true, Truly," I said quietly. "I left to survive." "Survive," she snapped. "It was so scary living in this town that you abandoned your own child." "Yes," I said simply. Truly rolled her eyes. "Berta said you got into some trouble at the factory." I tried to change the subject. "What happened?" Truly was silent for a while, looking at her hands. "Truly, I can help." "How?" She finally looked me in the eye. "You don't know anything about me, about my life, about what's going on in this town right now. But I know what Garfield Chemical is," I said quietly. Truly looked at me with suspicion. "What you don't know," I continued, "is that I worked there years ago. I was a safety inspector." "You?" Truly asked incredulously. "And I know that they never followed the rules of waste management. They didn't then, and apparently they don't now either." Something changed in Truly's eyes. For a moment it looked like she was about to say something, but then she closed her eyes again. "It doesn't matter," she said at last. "No one in this town will stand up to Garfield Chemical." "We'll get you a lawyer," I said. Truly rolled her eyes again. "How much money do you have any idea how much a good lawyer costs?" "I've saved some," I said. "It's not much, but it should be enough." "Why?" Truly asked again. I looked into her eyes, so similar to Garrett's, but different. There was not only anger in them, but also pain. "Because you're my daughter," I said, "and you're the only thing that matters to me." "You sound very convincing coming from a woman who abandoned a 4-year-old, Truly said bitterly. "You don't understand," I began, but she interrupted again. "You don't understand what my life has been like, what I've been through." She was almost screaming now. The guard approached us, but Berta made a sign to him that everything was under control. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't know what your life was like. But I want to know, and I want to help you now." Truly shook her head. "It's too late." "It's too late for that." "It's never too late," I said. "And if you're in trouble with Garfield Chemical, you need my help all the more. I know how they work." Truly looked at me silently for a long time. Then she stood up slowly. "Time's up," she said. "I have to go." "Truly, please." I stood up too. "Let me help you." "Do what you want," she replied coldly. With that, she turned and called the guard, who opened the door. Before she left, she turned back one last time. "And don't think that I have forgiven you. I never will." The door closed, and I was left standing there, staring into the void. Berta came over and put her hand on my shoulder. "Give her time," she said. You couldn't expect a warm welcome. No, I couldn't, I replied, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. But it hurts. I know, Berta nodded. We have a lot to talk about, especially what you're going to do next. We walked out of the prison into the bright sunshine that seemed out of place on such a gloomy day. Returning to Berta's house after the prison visit, I felt devastated. Truly's coldness was expected, but no less painful. She had every right to hate me, but that didn't change the fact that she needed my help, whether she wanted it or not. What's next? Berta asked, placing a cup of tea in front of me. I took a deep breath. I need more information about what Truly did, why she was interested in the factory, and what Maynard Sheen was doing. I know the lawyer they've assigned to her, Berta said. Phelps, a young guy, only a few years into his practice. He won't be very helpful. Better than no one. I rubbed my temples. Berta nodded and went to make a call. Meanwhile, I pulled out my laptop and started looking up information about Garfield Chemical. Sure enough, the company had a website that talked about its environmental initiatives and social responsibility. I smiled bitterly. 25 years ago, they were also talking about responsibility. But in the meantime, they were dumping industrial waste directly into the groundwater. Maynard Sheen turned out to be the son of old Robert Sheen, the former owner. Judging by his online photos, he was a typical representative of the new generation of managers, a well-groomed man in his mid-40s, with slicked back dark hair and a straight smile of 32 teeth. His biography pointed to studies at prestigious universities and a remarkable career in the corporate world before he returned to take over the family business after his father's death 5 years ago. Phelps is meeting us in an hour at the Blue Diner, Berta said, returning to the kitchen. I showed her the information I found about Sheen. Looks like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. He came back to town with big promises, Berta said. At first, everyone was excited. And then? And then it turned out that the modernization meant job losses, and the investment in the city was limited to a new golf course where only the factory executives and the local rich play. Typical, I muttered. However, Berta continued, he did introduce some new technologies to the factory. He installed modern air filters and started a waste recycling program. At least, that's the official story. Berta shrugged her shoulders. I wouldn't know. I just take care of the graves in the cemetery. I focused on the search again. I decided to check out the local environmental groups, which hadn't been around when I was alive. To my surprise, there was now a small group of activists in Garfield called Clean Water for All. Their social media page was not very active, but it contained several posts about suspicious actions by Garfield Chemical. The last post was dated almost a month ago, a complaint that the company did not provide data on the composition of its discharges, despite a request under the Freedom of Information Act. Bertha, do you know anything about the group Clean Water for All? Yes, they are a few environmental activists. They organize small protests near the plant from time to time, but few people take them seriously. Who is their leader? Edgar Quanley, I think. An old weirdo who lives on the outskirts, near the river. I wrote down his name. Maybe we should talk to him. There was still some time before I met with Attorney Phelps, so I decided to look through Truly's things that Berta had kept in her guest room. Has she been staying with you much? I asked, looking at the small suitcase of clothes. The last few months, almost constantly, Berta replied. Had a fight with Garrett. About who knows Garrett was always a difficult man, and he's gotten worse as he's gotten older. Truly said she couldn't take his control anymore. Among Truly's belongings, I found a notebook, a plain hardcover notebook, filled with small, neat handwriting. Flipping through the pages, I saw entries about delivery routes, a list of contacts, and cursory notes about everyday activities. But then, towards the end of the notebook, I found an entry that caught my attention. June 19th, water sampling near the southern discharge. The results were increased turbidity and a strange odor. June 21st, meeting with Quanley. I showed him the samples. He says he needs more evidence. June 27th, overheard a conversation at the plant. Shin was talking about special procedures every night between 1 and 3 o'clock. July 3rd, I found the documents in my father's office. The pipeline diagrams do not match the official plans. The last entry was dated July 14th, 3 days before the arrest. I have proof. I'm meeting with Quanley again tomorrow. If he doesn't help, I'll go straight to Sheen. Let him know we know. I closed the notebook, feeling a chill run down my spine. My daughter was digging up the same thing I was 25 years ago. Berta, I said, showing her the notebook, truly was collecting evidence of water contamination. Berta sighed. I wish she had come to me. I would have explained how dangerous it is. She's young and brave, I replied. I also found Edgar Quanley's address in the notebook. After I met with the lawyer, it would be worth paying him a visit. Phelps was waiting for us at the Blue Diner, a small place with faded blue walls and worn vinyl seats. The young lawyer looked tired and confused, and his cheap suit suggested that he wasn't doing too well. Mrs. Wojcik, he held out his hand, and I automatically shook it, though I was surprised that he knew my real name. Adrian Phelps, your daughter's public defender. We sat down at a table in the corner where no one could overhear us. What can you tell me about my daughter's case? I asked. Phelps opened a thin folder. Your daughter is accused of assaulting Maynard Sheen, the owner of Garfield Chemical. There are witnesses who confirm that she screamed at him and punched him several times before being detained by security. Sheen claims she threatened him and accused the company of murder. What exactly did she say? Phelps looked at the recordings. According to witnesses, something like, you're killing the whole town, and we all know it. What's the evidence in the case? Testimony from Sheen and 3 company employees. Surveillance video from the lobby. A medical report on the bruises on Sheen's face. What are the chances of winning? Phelps shook his head. Frankly, not very good. The fact of the attack is obvious. The best we can hope for is a reduced sentence. And if we can prove that Trulia had good reason to accuse Sheen? I asked. Phelps looked at me curiously. What kind of reasons? Water pollution, illegal waste dumping, concealing the fact that local residents were poisoned. My heart was pounding as I said these words. These are serious charges, Phelps said cautiously. Do you have evidence? Truly collected it. I took out my notebook. Phelps flipped through the pages, pausing from time to time to read some of the entries. His eyebrows rose higher and higher. It's interesting, but not enough for a trial, he said at last. We need concrete evidence, not just notes and suspicions. What if we find that evidence? I insisted. Then the situation might change, Phelps agreed. Garfield Chemical is a powerful company with a team of corporate lawyers. Wait, Berta suddenly said. Truly mentioned the documents in Garrett's office, pipeline diagrams that don't match the official ones. If we can get those documents, Phelps said with a hint of hope, that might be what we need. How? I asked. Garrett will never let me anywhere near his office. You might not have to, Berta said slowly. He always had a safe in the basement. I remembered the safe. It was an old-fashioned, mechanical lock that Garrett had inherited from his father. Do you have the keys to the house? I asked Berta. No, but I know where Garrett keeps a spare. Phelps looked alarmed. I have to warn you that breaking and entering and stealing documents could hurt the case more than it helps. And if the documents end up in the hands of the press, I asked, or the environmental inspectorate? That's another matter, Phelps agreed after a pause. But it's risky. Very risky. I thought back to the past years. everything I had run from, everything I had left behind. No more risky than leaving my daughter in prison, I said firmly. After we finished talking with Phelps, Berta and I returned to her house. I could feel the past pressing down on me with every hour I spent in Garfield. The memories I had tried to bury for so long were coming back with renewed vigor. After lunch, I decided to visit Edgar Quanley. Berta gave me her old car, saying she had nowhere to go anyway. Quanley's house was located on the very edge of town, almost by the river, which had once been clean and full of fish, but now turned into a dirty stream. It was a small wooden structure surrounded by an abandoned garden where vegetables and flowers grew in a chaotic manner. When I knocked on the door, no one answered. I was just about to leave when I heard a voice. "Who's there?" Turning around, I saw a gray-haired man in his 70s approaching the house from the river. "I'm looking for Edgar Quanley," I said. "That's me," the man replied, looking at me suspiciously. "How can I help you?" "My name is Myrta Wojcik. I am Truly's mother. Wojcik, are you related to Garrett?" "Ex-wife," I replied. "I know that Truly contacted you about the water contamination." Quanley continued to look at me with suspicion. "How do I know you don't work for Garfield Chemical?" I smiled bitterly. "They're the first ones who would want to see me dead, Mr. Quanley. 25 years ago, I tried to expose their crimes and was forced to flee the city. Something in my words, perhaps my sincerity or my pain, convinced Quanley. He nodded and invited me into his house. The inside was crowded with books, papers, and all sorts of devices that I recognized as homemade water analysis equipment. "Truly came to see me a few times," Quanley said, placing water bottles on the table. "Curious. Like you, she wanted to know what exactly Garfield Chemical was dumping into our river." "And what did you find out?" Quanley pulled a folder out of his desk drawer. "Here are the results of the tests I ran. I'm not a professional chemist, but I worked as a lab technician in a factory for 40 years before I retired. I looked through the papers, technical terms, formulas, tables. But even with my limited knowledge of chemistry, I knew the results were alarming. High levels of heavy metals," said Quanley, "especially cadmium and lead, and organic solvents that shouldn't be in the water. Do you know where the discharge is coming from? Officially, Garfield Chemical has a wastewater treatment plant and only discharges water that meets the standards. But Truly found evidence of a secret pipeline system that bypasses the treatment plant. Where did she find it exactly? In her father's papers. She showed me pictures, diagrams of the pipelines, reports on waste volumes that didn't match the official figures. Do you still have those photos?" Quanley shook his head. "Unfortunately, no. Truly said she would make copies of the documents and bring them to me, but she never did." I was disappointed, but not surprised. There was always a lack of evidence when it came to Garfield Chemical. "What happened the last time you saw Truly?" "She was excited," Quanley said. "She said she'd found some hard evidence in her father's office, some old documents proving that the company knew about the contamination 20 years ago and did nothing." 25, I corrected quietly. "You knew about it then?" "I worked there," I answered. "I was a security inspector. And yes, I learned about the secret discharges, and I tried to do something about it." "What happened?" I took a deep breath. It was a story I hadn't told anyone in years. My husband, Garrett, was the head of the plant's security. When I started asking questions about the strange pipelines and night work, he tried to convince me at first that everything was normal. But I kept digging, and I found evidence that the plant was dumping toxic waste directly into the groundwater. I stopped, collecting my thoughts. I always thought Garrett was a tough man, but a fair one. I thought he would take my side when he learned the truth. But he did. And what did you do? What I thought was right. I gathered evidence and went to the prosecutor, a young, ambitious prosecutor named Oral Das. The current Judge Das. Quanley was surprised. Yes, I nodded. He was ready to fight corporate crime then. Das started an investigation, but then Garfield Chemical countersued me, accusing me of defamation and industrial espionage. And what happened next? I came home one night and found Garrett waiting for me. He was drunk and angry. He said that I was destroying not only his career, but the whole town, that without the plant, Garfield would die. I fell silent, feeling the old fear returning. I saw Garrett's face distorted with rage again, felt his hands on my throat. "He beat you?" Quanley asked quietly. "Yes," I answered simply, but this time I thought he was going to kill me. I blacked out. When I came to, Garrett was asleep. I gathered the most necessary things and ran away. I changed my name, moved to another state. "And your daughter?" "It was the hardest decision of my life," I answered, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. And I believed him. "But now you've come back," he finally said, "because my daughter needs help, and it looks like history is repeating itself." As I was about to leave, I asked him, "How do you think Truly found out about the pollution, and why did she start investigating in the first place?" "She said she overheard her father talking to someone on the phone," Quanley replied. "Something about a water problem like in the 90s. It piqued her interest, and she started digging." I nodded. So it all started with the same thing. And maybe Garrett was still involved. After leaving the Quanley house, I decided to take a drive through the city center to collect my thoughts. When I stopped at the traffic light outside the city hall, I noticed a familiar figure coming out of the building. Garrett. He hadn't changed much over the years. Still tall and broad-shouldered, though his hair was now gray. He was talking to some man in an expensive suit, and they seemed to be arguing. I felt my heart pounding and instinctively ducked down so he wouldn't notice me. But it was too late. Garrett turned around and our eyes met. His face showed shock and then rage. He said something to his companion and quickly headed for my car. I panicked and fumbled for the door lock button, but the traffic light turned green and the cars behind me started honking their horns. I had to start driving. I drove a few blocks, constantly looking back, before pulling over in a quiet alley to catch my breath. My hands were shaking. One look from Garrett and I felt like that scared woman who ran away 25 years ago. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw a black SUV pull up behind me. Garrett got out of it. I tried to start the engine, but in my excitement, I dropped the keys. Before I could pick them up, the door opened and Garrett grabbed my shoulder. "Myrtle," he hissed. "What a surprise!" I forced myself to calm down and look him in the eye. "Hello, Garrett." "What are you doing here?" He squeezed my shoulder harder. "I came to help our daughter," I replied, trying to stay calm. "If you're not going to do that," he said, leaning closer, "Truly doesn't need your help, and I'm not going to let you screw it up again." "Screw it up," I tried to get free. "You're the one who left your own daughter in prison." "It's her own fault," Garrett said. "She got herself into trouble." "What exactly did she get herself into, Garrett?" I asked. "Your dirty dealings, your dumping of waste, your cover-up of people being poisoned." Garrett's face contorted with anger. "And you'd better not find out. Otherwise, you won't get away this time." "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Garrett," I said firmly, "and this time I won't run away. If you don't get your nose out of here in 24 hours, Garrett hissed, "I'm going to file a report on you on the old industrial espionage charges. Believe me, I won't have any trouble finding witnesses to prove that you stole confidential documents 25 years ago." "Try me," I replied, "and I'll tell everyone what kind of person you are. Not just about your part in the pollution cover-up, but about the way you treated your wife." "Who are you going to tell?" Garrett laughed. "You think anyone would believe a woman who abandoned a 4-year-old child?" It was a low blow, but I held back. I'm not the scared woman you knew anymore. He stared at me for a few seconds, then abruptly released my shoulder. Get out of town, Myrtle. This is my last warning. With that, he turned around, got into his SUV, and drove away. I sat still for a long time, trembling with adrenaline and old fear. But something had changed. Now fear was mixed with determination. I will not run away anymore. This time I would fight for myself and for my daughter. When I got back to Berta's house, I told her about the meeting with Quanley and the confrontation with Garrett. He's always been a dangerous man, Berta shook her head, and it seems he hasn't changed. I need to find the documents Truly was talking about, I said. You said you know where Garrett keeps the spare house key. Yes, Berta nodded. Garrett could come back at any time. We don't have a choice, I said. These documents may be Truly's only chance. Berta sighed. Okay, but not tonight. Garrett is on his guard right now. Let's wait until tomorrow when he's at work. I agreed, even though I was impatient to act immediately. But Berta was right. I had to be careful. There's one more thing, I said before I went to bed. I need to find Oral Das. I need to talk to him face to face. The judge, Berta was surprised. But he might remember me, I insisted, and the case we worked on. I'll try to find out, Berta promised. I know a friend who works in the courthouse as a janitor. That night, I barely slept, thinking back to the past, to Garrett, to everything that had happened 25 years ago. History was repeating itself, and I was afraid that this time my daughter might suffer the same way I had. But I will not let that happen. This time I will not run away and give up. I will find the evidence and save Truly, even if I have to confront the entire city, and especially to Garrett Wojcik. The next morning, Berta told me that Truly's preliminary hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Judge Oral Das would preside. The news made me pace the room nervously while Berta made coffee. This is a chance, I said, more to myself than to her. Maybe Das remembers me. You've changed a lot, Myrtle, Berta said, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. But it was a high-profile case. He must remember the details, even if he doesn't recognize me personally. Berta shrugged. I wouldn't count on it. Das is part of the system now. He has close ties to Garfield Chemical and other big businesses in town. This news disappointed me, but did not surprise me. Very few people could remain independent in a city like Garfield, where one company controlled almost everything. We arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes before the hearing was to begin. The corridors were almost empty, with only a few lawyers hurrying around with their files and an elderly janitor wiping down the glass doors. The courtroom was small but bright, with wooden benches for spectators and a majestic judge's chair. When we entered, several people were already sitting there, including Lawyer Phelps, who was nervously looking through papers. Mr. Phelps, I greeted him, sitting down next to him. Is there anything new? I'm afraid not, the young lawyer shook his head, but I've prepared a motion to reduce bail. Where are the prosecutors? I asked, looking around the room. Oh, they'll be here soon, Phelps smiled bitterly. Garfield Chemical hired Sullivan and Brenner, the best law firm in the area. That didn't bode well. I looked around the room again and suddenly noticed Garrett sitting in the back row. Myrtle, Berta touched my shoulder. Are you sure you want to do this? It's not too late to leave it alone. It is, I replied. 25 years too late. At that moment, the door opened and a group of people entered the room. A tall, confident man in his 40s, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, walked in front, probably one of Garfield Chemical's lawyers. He was followed by the younger Sheen, whom I had seen in photographs Maynard, the owner of the company. Behind them were several other men in business suits. A few minutes later, Truly was brought out of a side door, accompanied by 2 bodyguards. She looked tired, but she stood up straight with her head held high. Her gaze swept the room, stopped on her father, then on me. She rolled her eyes in defiant disdain and sat down on the bench. The bailiff announced, "Stand up. Court is in session. Judge Oral Das is presiding." We all stood up. A short man of about 65, with carefully combed gray hair and deep wrinkles on his face, came out of the door behind the judge's chair. He moved slowly, with the dignity that only comes from authority and confidence in one's rightness. The judge sat down, nodded to the audience, and announced the beginning of the hearing. The hearing began with formalities, introductions of the parties, announcement of charges. The prosecutor read out the indictment, which accused Truly of assaulting Maynard Sheen, damaging company property, and attempting industrial espionage. When it was the defense's turn, Phelps stood up and began to talk about mitigating circumstances, that Truly had no previous problems with the law, that she was a college graduate with good grades. He filed a motion to lower her bail, arguing that Truly had no intention of leaving the city and was not a threat to society. All this time, I was watching Judge Das. He listened to the parties' arguments with a neutral expression, sometimes taking notes. Nothing in his behavior indicated that he remembered the events of 25 years ago. The prosecutor objected to the reduction of bail, arguing that Truly could pose a threat to witnesses and destroy evidence if released. He also emphasized the seriousness of the charges and the potential damage to Garfield Chemical's reputation. "I would like to call a witness, Your Honor," the prosecutor suddenly said. "Garrett Wojcik, the defendant's father." This was unexpected. I tensed as Garrett stood up and walked confidently to the witness stand. After being sworn in, the prosecutor began his questioning. "Mr. Wojcik, how long have you been working for Garfield Chemical?" 32 years, Garrett answered in his deep, confident voice. "I'm the head of security for the company. Have you noticed any strange behavioral changes in your daughter lately?" Truly, Wojciech Garrett paused, as if hesitating. "Yes," he said finally. "Truly has begun to show an unhealthy interest in the company's internal affairs. She was asking questions about security systems, about technological processes that an ordinary courier shouldn't know about." "Did you have any reason to believe that your daughter was gathering information about the company with the intent of disclosing it or using it against Garfield Chemical?" Objection! Phelps jumped up. "Overruled," Judge Das said. "The witness may answer." "Yes, I had my suspicions," Garrett continued. "Truly began to associate with people known for their anti-industry activities, including Edgar Quanley. She also took photos of the company's facilities without permission. In your opinion, could your daughter have been planning an attack on Mr. Sheen?" "Objection," Phelps interjected again. "More speculation." "Sustained," Judge Das nodded. "Rephrase the question, prosecutor. Did you notice any signs of aggression in your daughter's behavior before the incident with Mr. Sheen?" Garrett paused again. Lately, she had become particularly irritable, argumentative, and could fly off the handle at the drop of a hat. I couldn't listen to Garrett blacken his own daughter anymore. Without realizing what I was doing, I stood up. "That's not true," I exclaimed. All heads turned to me. Judge Das tapped his gavel harshly. "Silence in the courtroom. Who are you and what are you doing?" I took a deep breath and straightened up. "I am the mother of the accused and the ex-wife of this witness, and I have reason to believe that he is giving false testimony." The courtroom was loud. Truly rolled her eyes when I entered the courtroom. But then the judge froze and whispered, "It's her." The whole courtroom went quiet. They had no idea who I really was until Das spoke again, louder this time. "Myrtle Wojcik, the same Myrtle Wojcik who worked as a safety inspector at Garfield Chemical 25 years ago." "Yes, Your Honor," I answered, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Judge Das took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes as if he couldn't believe his vision. Interesting, he said. Please come closer, Mrs. Wojcik. I walked forward, feeling the stares of everyone present. Garrett's gaze was especially heavy, and I could almost physically feel his anger. Your Honor, the prosecutor interrupted, this is a violation of court procedure. We can't allow a random person to interrupt the witness. Mrs. Wojcik is not a random person, Judge Das replied, and I have reason to believe that her presence may be important to this case. He turned to me. Mrs. Wojcik, if I remember correctly, you disappeared from Garfield 25 years ago under rather mysterious circumstances. Yes, Your Honor, I nodded, and I can explain why. But first, I would like to say that the charges against my daughter are baseless. She did not attack Mr. Sheen with the intent to harm him. She was trying to inform him about his company's environmental violations. That's a lie, Garrett shouted, rising from the witness stand. Your Honor, this woman abandoned her family, abandoned her 4-year-old daughter, and now she's trying to justify her actions by making up stories about violations. Mr. Wojcik, Judge Das said sternly, take your seat and remain silent until asked. Garrett reluctantly sat down, but continued to throw fierce glances at me. Mrs. Wojcik, Judge Das continued, you said you had an explanation for your disappearance. I'm listening. I took a deep breath. 25 years ago, while working as a safety inspector for Garfield Chemical, I discovered evidence that the company was secretly dumping toxic waste into the groundwater, bypassing official treatment facilities. I gathered this evidence and presented it to then Assistant District Attorney Oral Das. The judge nodded, confirming what I had said. I received documents from you that proved serious environmental violations, but then you disappeared and the investigation reached a dead end. I disappeared because I was forced to, I said, looking directly at Garrett. After I handed over the documents, my then-husband, Garrett Wojcik, who was and still is the head of security at Garfield Chemical, found out about it. He threatened me. He said that if I didn't stop the investigation and leave town, he would not only destroy me, but also our daughter. That's nonsense, Garrett exclaimed. She's always been mentally unstable. She made up stories, saw conspiracies where there were none. Mr. Wojcik, Judge Das banged his gavel. One more word without permission, and I will have you taken into custody for contempt of court. Garrett was silent, but I could see his fists clenching. Continue, Mrs. Wojcik, the judge said. I was afraid for my life and for the life of my child, I continued. Garrett was a violent man. He often used force when he was unhappy. The night he found out about my involvement in the investigation, he almost killed me. I involuntarily touched the scars on my neck, hidden by the collar of my blouse. I ran away. I changed my name, started a new life in another state. The hardest decision of my life was to leave my daughter behind. But Garrett swore he would find and kill us both if I tried to take her away. And I believed him. The courtroom was silent. I could see Truly looking at me with wide eyes, for the first time without contempt or anger. And now you're back, Judge Das said. Why? Because my daughter is in trouble, I answered simply. And that trouble is related to the very thing that made me run away 25 years ago. Garfield Chemical continues to dump toxic waste into the water, and Truly, like me, tried to stop it. Judge Das looked at Truly, then at Garrett, then at Maynard Sheen, who sat there with a stony expression. Do you have any evidence? Yes, I nodded. First, my daughter's notes on the water samples she took near the plant. Secondly, the testimony of Edgar Quanley, a former employee of the plant, who independently analyzed these samples and found high levels of heavy metals and organic solvents. And thirdly, I hesitated. knowing that what I was about to say could have serious consequences. Third, I have copies of documents that truly found in her father's office, documents that prove that Garfield Chemical knew about the contamination 25 years ago and continues to hide that information today. It was a lie. I did not have these documents, but I hoped that this statement would force Garrett to come clean. And I was right. Garrett jumped up from his seat, his face flushed with rage. "That's impossible," he growled. "You couldn't have gotten those documents. They're in a safe in your basement, Mr. Wojcik," Judge Das asked calmly. "It turns out that such documents do exist." Garrett looked around in confusion, looking for support, but even Garfield Chemical's lawyers seemed surprised by his reaction. "Your Honor," one of the lawyers said, "I object to this farce. We are here to discuss bail for the accused, not to hear unfounded accusations against a respected company." "I call the shots in my court, Mr. Sullivan," Judge Das said, "and I believe this testimony is directly relevant." He turned to me. "Mrs. Wojcik, are you prepared to produce these documents to the court?" "Yes, Your Honor," I answered, hoping my lie wouldn't become apparent too quickly. "Mr. Phelps, prepare a motion to admit these documents into evidence. Mr. Sullivan, prepare an opposition, if you wish. And now—" But he didn't get to finish. Garrett, who had been seething with anger all along, suddenly exploded. "You don't understand what she's doing," he shouted, pointing at me with a finger shaking with rage. "She wants to destroy this town. 25 years ago, she tried to close the plant, and now she's trying again. Do you know how many people will lose their jobs if Garfield Chemical closes? The whole town will die. Mr. Wojcik," Judge Das said sternly, "I warned you about contempt of court. I don't care about your warnings." Garrett continued to scream. "She's a traitor. She abandoned her own child, and now she's coming back to ruin our lives. Myrtle has always been a problem. She's mentally unstable, always making up stories, seeing conspiracies where there were none. Security!" Judge Das called out. "Escort Mr. Wojcik out of the courtroom." Two guards approached Garrett, but he pulled away from them. "Garfield Chemical is the lifeblood of this town. Without it, we'll all die. Tiens, it's better to die of hunger than of poisoned water," someone suddenly shouted from the audience. It was Edgar Quanley, who, as it turned out, was also present at the hearing. The room erupted into a shouting match. Some supported Garrett, others supported Quanley. Judge Das banged his gavel to no avail, trying to restore order. In the midst of this chaos, I noticed Maynard Sheen leaning over to his lawyer and whispering something in his ear. "Your Honor," he shouted over the din, "my client, Mr. Sheen, would like to take the stand." Judge Das banged his gavel again, harder this time. Silence in the courtroom. "Mr. Shin, do you have anything to say?" The courtroom gradually quieted down. The guards finally took Garrett out, who was still shouting something about betrayal and the death of the city. Maynard Sheen stood up, straightened his tie, and slowly walked to the witness stand. Unlike Garrett, he looked calm and collected. "Your Honor," he began in a steady voice, "I understand the concerns of Mrs. Wojcik and her daughter. Environmental safety is a priority for Garfield Chemical. However, I must point out that our company has always complied with all environmental regulations and is regularly inspected by the relevant authorities." He paused, looking around the room. "As for the accusations of toxic waste dumping, they are completely unfounded. Garfield Chemical installed state-of-the-art treatment equipment 5 years ago when I took over the company. All of our discharges meet the strictest environmental standards." "What about the documents that Mrs. Wojcik mentioned?" Judge Das asked. "I can't comment on documents I haven't seen," Sheen replied. But I can assure you that if there were any violations, they were before I took over, and I have done my best to correct any mistakes of the past. He looked around the room again and met Truly's eyes. Regarding the incident with Ms. Wojcik, Shin continued, I am willing to withdraw the assault charges if she publicly apologizes and agrees not to spread unverified rumors about our company. It was an unexpected offer. I looked at Truly, waiting for her reaction. It's a generous offer, Mr. Shin, Judge Das said. Ms. Wojcik, do you agree to these terms? Truly stood up slowly. No, Your Honor, she said firmly, and I will not remain silent about what Garfield Chemical is doing to our city. Sheen sighed in mock disappointment. I'm sorry, Miss Wojcik. I was hoping we could resolve this amicably. Wait, Phelps said suddenly, standing up. Your Honor, I'd like to file a motion to introduce new evidence. What is this, Mr. Phelps? Judge Das asked, looking at the papers. These are the results of a water analysis done by an independent laboratory commissioned by Edgar Quanley, Phelps replied. This is inadmissible, Your Honor, his lawyer interjected. This so-called evidence is irrelevant to the assault charge. On the contrary, Phelps argued, it is directly relevant to my client's motives. She did not attack Mr. Sheen with the intent to harm him. She was trying to draw his attention to a serious environmental issue. Judge Das studied the documents carefully. Mr. Phelps, how did you get these papers? I got them from Mr. Quanley this morning, Phelps replied. He's been doing independent water testing for the last 6 months and has documented a gradual increase in pollution levels. Shin interjected again. Your Honor, this man is not a qualified expert. Mr. Quanley has worked as a lab technician for Garfield Chemical for 40 years, Phelps countered. He is more than qualified to perform basic chemical analysis. Judge Das was silent for a while, looking at the documents. I'm admitting these materials into evidence, he said at last, and I believe they are directly relevant to the case. He turned to Trulia. Ms. Wojcik, these documents support your accusations. Yes, Your Honor, Truly nodded, but this is only part of the evidence. I also have photos of secret pipelines that bypass the official treatment plant and recordings of conversations between plant employees about special procedures that take place at night. And where is this evidence now? The judge asked. On my phone and in the cloud storage, Truly replied. The police confiscated my phone when I was arrested, but I can provide access to the cloud storage. Judge Duss nodded. Good. Mr. Phelps, file a motion for the return of your client's personal effects and for access to these materials. He turned his gaze to Sheen, who stood there with a stony expression on his face. Mr. Sheen, in light of this new evidence, do you still insist on pressing charges against Ms. Wojcik? Sheen looked at his lawyer, then slowly shook his head. No, Your Honor, I withdraw the charges. There was a whisper in the room. I felt the tension that had been holding me back all these days ease a little. However, Shin added, I categorically deny the charges of environmental violations. I see, Judge Das nodded. In that case, since the main charge has been withdrawn, I'm going to dismiss Truly Wojcik. He banged his gavel. But this is not the end of the matter. I believe that the allegations of environmental violations at Garfield Chemical are serious and require a thorough investigation. That is why I am ordering the creation of an independent commission of representatives of the Environmental Inspectorate, local administration, and the public to review all aspects of the plant's operations, and I will personally ensure that this investigation is conducted properly. Shin looked shocked. Your Honor, this is unacceptable interference in the activities of a private company. That is your right, Mr. Shin, Judge Das replied calmly. But while the case is being considered by higher authorities, my decision stands. He turned to Truly. Miss Wojcik, You are free to go. But I recommend that you be careful. Not everyone in this town will be happy with your actions. Truly nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. Finally, the judge looked at me. Miss Wojcik, I'd like to talk to you in my chambers. There are many questions I'd like to have answered. Of course, Your Honor, I replied. Judge Das adjourned the hearing and left the room. I looked back at Truly, who was standing there, surrounded by guards removing her handcuffs. Our eyes met, and for the first time in days, she smiled slightly at me.